அருட்பெருஞ்சோதி அருட்பெருஞ்சோதி தானி பெரும் கருணை அருட்பெருஞ்சோதி 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 தானி பெரும் கருணை அருட்பெருஞ்சோதி 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 தானி பெரும் கருணை அருட்பெருஞ்சோதி.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Jayarajaya, and thank you, Prasanna, Vaji, and all the others, Mangalam Amma. I hope you're all doing well. Let me start let us start with this Balakrishna Pillai, as you know, who put all the writings of Vallalar together based on various records. He has a Vartha in book 4, and let me just read that Vartha. It's appropriate for the topic, that I'm going to talk about. Varga pulai kolai tavirthu உயிர் நலம் பரவி உயிர்க்கு உபகரிக்கும் புனித வாழ்வினர். வாழ்க எல்லா உயிரும். So that is very striking. வாழ்க புலை கொலை தவிர்த்து உயிர் நலம் பரவி உயிர்க்கு உபகரிக்கும் புனித வாழ்வினர். So as members of Samarasa Sutta Sanmargam, we are all in a very privileged position because we have the opportunity to have this as an ideal. புலை கொலை தவிர்த்து உயிர் நலம் பரவி உயிர்க்கு உபகரிக்கும் புனித வாழ்வினர். We can become such punida வாழ்வினர் by the grace of Vallalar. December, as you know, is a significant month for those interested in Samarasa Siddha Sanmargam and interested in the path, because in December of 1871, the Satya Jnana Sabai, the great hall of truth knowledge, which Vallalar designed and helped to construct with the contributions of many of his associates, without any formal training in architecture. As you know, the Satya Jnana Sabai has a very unique structure. The great hall of truth knowledge, or Satya Jnana Sabai, was completed in December 1871 and then opened to the public in January 1872. So it's a significant month, and let us recall again Vallalar's Arul and Karunai, which led him to bring about this wonderful structure, which of course he did at the command of Arupparanjodi's Tirukkuruppu, and he himself says in the Vinnapangal that Arupparanjodi brought about its construction and completion without any obstacles. And as you know, Satyajnana Sabai is a symbol and the location of Arupparanjodi's Arul Nadam. So we cannot take it lightly, you know. It is a very, very significant structure. And of course, we're not just going there to see the light, Jyoti and so on, but also to think about the very structure of Satyajnana Sabai. Swami Sarvanananda has written about it, and I think Vanmiganathan, Pathway to God, in his book Pathway to God, trod by Ramalingar, has also said something about it, but perhaps it can be taken as a topic for another session. The different aspects of Satyajnana Sabai and what they are symbols of. They're all symbols of this Arul Nadam of Arupparanjodi in the nature, body, soul complex. Iyarkai Anma Degam complex. In that complex, Aruparanjodi is continuing this Arul Nadam. And let us not forget that this Arul Nadam includes Shrishti or creation, Kathal or protection, Aittal or destruction or dissolution, Maraital or concealment, and then Anugram Puridal, elimination, Telivasaidal, clarification, illumination, revelation. So we have to keep in mind that Arul Nadam has all those 5 aspects. So anyway, let us remember that December is the month in which this great Hall of Truth Knowledge was completed in 1871 in Vallalar. Let me then start also with Malayur Sadasivam's recitation, singing of a few of the verses that are relevant to the topic of vegetarianism, Vallalar's vegetarianism. So I'm going to play that. It's going to be just a minute or two, I believe.
எங்கே கருணை இயற்கையில் உள்ளன அங்கே விளங்கிய அருள் சிவமே யாரே எண்ணினும் இறங்குகின்றாக்கு ஈரே அளிக்கும் சிதம்பர சிவமே பொய் நெறி அனைத்தினும் புகுத்தாது என அருள் என்னதி செலுத்திய சித்தமை சிவமே சொல்லா நெறிய உருவருள் நெறி என பல்கால் எனக்கு பலஞ்சமை சிவமே உயிரலாம் பொதுவின் உளம்பட நோக்கிய ஜெயிரலாம் விடுகன சத்திய சிவமே பயிர் குரு கரண பரிசுகள் வற்பல உயிர் திரள் ஒன்றென உரைத்தமை சிவமே உயிர் யாம் உயிரிவை உணர்ந்த உயிர் நலம் பரவு என்று உரைத்தமை சிவமே இயலருள் ஒளியோன் ஏகத்தில் நாம் உயிரொளி காண்க என்று உரைத்தமை சிவமே அருளாது அணுகும் அதைந்திடாததனா அருள் நலம் பரவு என்று அடைந்தமை சிவமே.
Yes, so those verses, Uirul Yam, Emul Uir, Ivayarinde, Uir Nalam Paravaga, and Arindame Suvame, that is going to be very important. Also, Enge Karune Yerkain Volangina, and also Yare no Merangagandarka, Siriali Kumsidambra Suvame. Pair Buru Karana Parasigal Parpala, Uirpiral, Wondrana Uritame Suvame. These verses all come into play when we consider today's topic of vegetarianism, Vallalar's vegetarianism. I want to say again that it is our great good fortune that by divine grace or Arul, we have come into contact with the revolutionary and sublime teachings of Vallalar, who is one of the great, if not the greatest spiritual master and teacher in history. May we all study carefully, absorb, and practice his teachings diligently. Now, there is actually 2 parts, but I won't get into the second part of my presentation. The 2 parts are first Vallalar's case for vegetarianism, and the second is actually Suddha Sanmargam vegetarian diet, which I hope to address in a separate talk, subject to schedule and everything, sometime in January. I can do the second part on Suddha Sanmargam vegetarian diet. Many different interesting aspects to it, based on some indications left by Vallalar, including references in some of the Agaval verses. But I'll deal with that sometime in January with Vallalar's Arul. So this presentation today will deal with Vallalar's argument for vegetarianism. And it's a very persuasive, very convincing case. And you can see the clarity of Vallalar's thinking and the clearness of his spiritual intelligence and knowledge when we look at the relevant passages, primarily from the Jivagarnya work on essay part 1 of Jivakarnya Workam essay, which they say he read at the opening of the Satya Dharmasala. You should know that, or perhaps you already know, that we do not have a manuscript in Vallalar's hand of the Jivakarnya Workam. What we have, according to Balakrishna Pillai, are copies, handwritten copies by others. And as you know, it's come to just 2 or 3 parts, and supposedly it was done in 7 parts, and we only have 2 or 3, barely, with many repetitions, in fact. As you know, if you've read part 1 and part 2, there are some new things in part 2 of Jivakarnya Workam, but there's a lot of repetition, which is fine, because it then tells us that those were probably the points emphasized by Vallalar, and others, noted it down in their handwritten copies. Now, the Jivakarnya, before I get into the case Vallalar makes for vegetarianism in his great incomplete essay, Jivakarnya Workam, also want to point out that this issue of vegetarian food, Sutta Sanmarga Sattva Agara Workam, or Unavu Workam, is really critical at the present time with the COVID-19 pandemic. And you may ask what the connection is. Well, my main claim here is that vegetarian food, and I'll elaborate this in part 2 presentation on Sanmarga vegetarian diet, but the proposal is that vegetarian food, subject to the required hygiene for cleaning and preparation. You make vegetarian food in unhygienic conditions, it's not going to be helpful. So it has to be cleaned and prepared in hygienic conditions. If you do so, then vegetarian food, particularly the kind of food that Vallalar has emphasized, it provides one important form of defense against the SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 virus. So the more you move from meat eating and become a vegetarian, of course, what is desirable, you become a full-fledged vegetarian. But for those who are used to meat eating, they've got to make the transition, keep reducing the meat and increasing the vegetarian food. This will provide one very important defense against the SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 virus. Now, why do I make that claim? If you look at the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, the agency, the U.S. agency, they say that, there is really no evidence that the coronavirus is transmitted through meat products themselves. So, to quote them, there's no evidence that the meat products themselves could be a source of COVID-19 infection. And they put out this statement in light of this significant outbreak of COVID-19 cases, in meat plants. They have estimated that about 236,000 236,000 to 310,000 cases and deaths. 6 to 8% of all the U.S. cases. 4,300 to 5,200, that's about 3% to 4% of all U.S. deaths from COVID-19. And they say that this is, the origin is from these meat and chicken processing plants. And you may have read in the news, the outbreak after outbreak, not only in the United States, but also in Germany and places like that, outbreaks of COVID-19 infection in meat and chicken processing factories. Now, you can't separate that completely from what these factories are doing, processing plants are doing. They are killing and processing animal parts. There is blood, there is excrement or shit and everything else, It's all there, blood and all these body parts, animal body parts and so forth, and you really can't say that the outbreak has no connection with those. So coming back again to the CDC claim, there is no evidence that the meat products themselves could be a source of COVID-19 infection at the meat and chicken processing plants. Now, there's a logical point, and the logical point is absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. What does that mean? It means supposing you can't find evidence that your cat is in your home, okay? You've looked at the kitchen or the bedroom, the living room, you don't see your cat, Pune. That doesn't mean that your cat is not in the house. It may be hiding somewhere, maybe under a sofa, under a table, somewhere, you know, and you're just not a cupboard or something, and you're just not seeing it. So, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Absence of the evidence for the cat is not evidence that the cat is absent in the house. So, when they say there is no evidence that the meat products themselves cause the COVID-19 infection of these meat and chicken processing plants, they're not on very firm grounds, logically. Maybe they just haven't looked at it. And in fact, I don't see any serious study of the claim that the meat products themselves have something to do with the spread of the infection. I mean, given the fact that the virus is in body parts and fluids, and the place is full of that, that's what they do. They chop up the animals, they chop up the parts, they drain them blood and this and that. And if the virus is in, a virus can contaminate, infect these bodily organs, then how can the bodily parts not be connected to the outbreak of the COVID-19 infection in these meat plants and chicken processing plants? You know, so that's a kind of a puzzle, at least for me, and perhaps you also, hopefully you also find that puzzling. One explanation I would offer here is that they have not seriously considered this, and they're trying to say, well, there's no evidence, without actually, you know, talking about studies, research to examine whether the COVID virus is also spreading from its presence in these animal body parts, blood and this and that, to the human beings, and then they spread it around. One explanation why it's not taken seriously is, of course, the meat and chicken industry, particularly in the United States. You know, the meat and the poultry industry contributes $832 billion to the economy. That's nearly 6% of the total gross domestic product. And it has about 6.2 million jobs, and contributes $200 billion in wages and benefits. So imagine if they took this seriously, it would certainly shake up that industry, and especially at this time, that would be a further disruption, a serious disruption of the economy. So I think that's the reason why they're kind of simply looking away from this very important question as to the contribution of the animal parts themselves contaminated by the coronavirus to the spread of COVID-19 cases in these meat and chicken processing plants. Those of you who want to pursue it further might want to do so, and I'm certainly doing that. But that's, you know, that's the context of the importance of taking Vallalar's teachings on vegetarianism seriously. And as I said, my proposal is that vegetarianism, particularly the vegetarian diet that Vallalar recommends, but you know, you can incorporate other things also that are compatible with Vallalar's teachings, provides one important defense. So in other words, if you want to protect yourself against the coronavirus, in addition to mass perhaps some hand gloves, regular washing of the hands with soap, maintaining physical distance, isolation if needed, avoiding crowds and so forth, in addition to all of those things. And then, of course, we have the vaccine, which has come about as a result of divine grace. These vaccines take 10 years, and we have one now in almost a year. Thanks to, of course, the cooperative efforts of the medical scientists, but it's certainly remarkable that what usually takes 10 years has been accomplished in a year. So the vaccine, of course, is also going to be a very important form of defense, but vegetarian diet needs to be considered seriously, and that's my proposal, and that's the context in which this topic needs to be situated, Vallalar's vegetarianism. Somebody asked, why are you talking about vegetarianism at this time? These are some of the reasons why I'm talking about Vallalar's great teaching on vegetarianism at this time. And I have pointed out in an earlier talk that I think that from the standpoint of Samrasa Siddhasan Margam, the abuse of animals, let's not forget that the outbreak started in the wet markets of Wuhan, China, where these animals are brought and slaughtered, mixed up and slaughtered. Their blood is all mixed up and so forth, and the meat is kept on the blood of the slaughtered animals and sold. It's all mixed up, all kinds of animals that in nature have completely separate habitats. They're all abducted, captured, put in small cages, tormented, and killed. And the meat is sold, and that's the kind of environment in which this outbreak came. And even SARS, the previous one, also came from similar situations. So there has to be a very radical change in the way, not just in Wuhan or in other parts of Asia, including, I'm sure, India, where these kinds of things are going on. There has to be a radical change, and we have to really start treating animals in a compassionate manner. Otherwise, we're going to see more and more of this zoonosis, Z-O-O-N-O-S-I-S. Zoonosis is the transmission of bacteria, viruses, pathogens, disease-causing pathogens, and so forth from the animals to humans. We're going to see that. It's not going to stop as long as we continue with this, and the meat consumption, including poultry consumption, chicken, and so forth, are a very important contributing factor to all this. And even the influenza outbreak of 1917, 1918, they say that it can be traced back to poultry. These are very serious matters and underline the importance of taking Vallalar's teachings on vegetarianism seriously. With those, preliminary remarks, let's move on to actually examining Vallalar's teachings on vegetarianism. We know, of course, that Vallalar was born in the Karunigar community, and they were traditionally vegetarians. I'm not sure how many of the Karunigars in the 19th century were vegetarians, but certainly by tradition, the Karunigar community were vegetarians. It's interesting that Vallalar was born in that community. We know from Toluvur Velayuda Mudaliyar's reminiscences that Vallalar was a strict vegetarian. And Velayuda Mudaliyar also says that Vallalar had the power to make someone abstain from non-vegetarian food, pulao, by a mere look, like an entreating look. I don't think it's murip or glaring or staring, but a compassionate look. And we can easily imagine a situation where this could have happened. Maybe somebody sat and wanted to eat fish or whatever, curry or something, mean curry or something. And Thuluwu must have been there. Vallalar was there, and Vallalar just cast a look at that person, and the person probably said, no, it's okay, I'm not going to eat it. Probably something like that was the source of Valley the Moviliyar's claim that Vallalar had the power to make someone refrain or abstain from non-vegetarian food by a mere look. We also know that the Satya Dharmasalai cooked and distributed only vegetarian food, and we know that the Satya Jnana Sabha has the notification that only those who have refrained from killing or murder and meat eating, kulal, should enter inside. Pulai kolai tavithavar matrume ulle puga vendum. And I don't think Vallalar meant it casually. So it has to be taken very seriously. If I'm a non-vegetarian, or if I'm still consuming non-vegetarian, then I shouldn't enter the Satyajnana Sabha. I should be outside and then do my best to overcome my craving for non-vegetarian food, and when I have overcome it, then only should I enter. That's the sign of respect for Vallalar and his great teachings. Now we know that, when you compare Vallalar with some of the other great religious teachers, you can see Vallalar's stature towering above them. So, for instance, the Buddha, he died of eating uncooked meat. He was a Buddha bhikshu, monk. He begged for his food. Let's not forget he came from a princely family and gave everything up. But he and his order of monks, Bhikshugal, Buddha Bhikshugal, they used to beg, and Chunda was a laborer, lower class person, and he invited Buddha and gave him uncooked meat that was not cooked properly, and the Buddha was almost 80 or something at the time, and he ate and then died of indigestion. But what emerges from that is the Buddha did take non-vegetarian food, which contradicts some of his other teachings, especially on compassion for living beings. We know Jesus and Muhammad, they all ate meat. They were not vegetarians. Ramakrishna, who's considered a great saint, he used to eat fish. And I sometimes wonder whether his throat cancer, he died of really horrible throat cancer, whether that was due to eating fish caught in the chemically polluted waters of the Ganga, all kinds of factories pouring all kinds of chemicals into it, toxic chemicals. And, they used to catch fish there and fry the fish, and he used to eat that fish. Maybe that was the cause of his throat cancer, who knows? And his great disciple Vivekananda had this serious misconception that somehow not eating meat is responsible for India's weak condition. And he went abroad to the United States, to Japan and all that, and he saw the Japanese, being so industrious and active and so forth, and they had developed their country, to an industrially developed country, and he claimed that was because the Japanese, it had something to do with the Japanese diet, which included fish and all that kind of stuff. And then he was actually advocating that for Indians. And it's actually, logically, it's a mistaken argument, because the success of the Japanese, or for that matter the Europeans or the British or the Americans, had nothing to do with meat eating. It had to do with other things. Economic success doesn't come from meat eating. Scientific advancements and so forth are not produced simply because you're a meat eater. Ramanujan, the great genius mathematician of India, he was a vegetarian. Subramaniam Chandrasekhar, the famous Nobel laureate astrophysicist who made contributions to our understanding of black holes, he was a vegetarian. They came from Brahmin family and they were vegetarians. So it has nothing to do with scientific brilliance or technological brilliance or economic success. So Vivekananda, had a serious misconception. Not only in thinking that meat is going to be somehow turning Indians into a more active generation of people, but also in his misconception that vegetarianism somehow makes you weak and lazy and so forth. There's really no evidence for all of that. If you want to talk about vegetarianism and strength, just take a look at the gorilla. Yeah. Certainly we can agree the gorilla is not a weak animal, right? Now, what is the gorilla? The gorilla is a vegetarian. Okay? It lives on roots and vegetables. The elephant, too, is a vegetarian. It's very powerful, but let's just stick with the gorilla. So, such a powerful animal because it's also part of the ape family, and our ancestral species was one of the ape family. And so the gorilla is such a strong creature, but whatever strength it has comes from vegetarian diet. There's something in the food that it eats, roots and leaves and so forth. We also know that other very powerful beasts were not vegetarian, but still go after vegetarian food, like the bears eat honey, they go after berries and so on and so forth. So Vivekananda's notion that somehow vegetarianism produces weakness and so forth of mind and body is absolutely without any basis. It depends, of course, on your vegetarian diet. I mean, if you simply eat rice and some vegetable that's not really nutritious because you fried it to death, yeah, of course, you're not going to be strong. But that's just a caricature, misrepresentation of vegetarianism. Vallalar's vegetarianism, and as I said, I can deal with the Sudarshan Margam diet in part 2 next month. There's a lot of things that can make the body strong. And in fact, Vallalar himself talks about it, as we'll see from some of the passages in Jivakarnya Workam. He does mention Vegate Valuladaga Seidal, that is making the body strong. And he mentions only vegetarian food. So Vallalar is on the right track in maintaining, as early as 1867 or thereabouts, when this essay was started, that vegetarian food is sufficient when it's properly designed, sufficient to make the body strong. Well, of course, you're also going to do exercise and all that kind of stuff. That goes without saying. But it's a very serious misconception that Vivekananda had, that vegetarianism produces weakness of mind and body, and therefore to regenerate Indians into people that are very strong in mind and body, they have to start eating meat. It's a very serious misconception, and it's also contrary to some of the spiritual teachings that he subscribed to. I'm not aware that people have really examined Vivekananda's misconceptions on meat eating seriously. If you've read anything about Vivekananda at all, usually full of praise. And of course, he made many notable contributions, did some really good social work, or started some very good social work and all that. But that doesn't mean that his ideas on meat eating and vegetarianism were on the right track. As I said, it's a very serious misconception and logical mistake. There is no cause-effect. The conclusion he is drawing by just observing how the Japanese were so active and then noticing that their diet included meat and fish and all that, and then he's concluding that the fish and meat is the cause of the activity of the Japanese, the active nature of the Japanese. That's actually logically mistaken. There are a number of other causes. And in any case, what actually is the contribution of meat and poultry and so forth is a matter for scientific study. Okay, and we have plenty of studies now on their harmful effects. We have plenty of studies that show and recommend, in fact, that vegetarian diet is the way to health and longevity. Okay, so with those remarks, let's take a look at why Vallalar thinks that we should refrain from meat eating and adopt vegetarian food. So let's start with some passages from Jivakarnya Varkam. That's the essay on the ethic and the path of compassion, which Vallalar started in 1867. And as I said, it's reported that he read the first part, in which he actually makes out his case for vegetarianism, when he opened the Satya Dharmasala, or the House of True Charity, which to this day is dispensing vegetarian food to the poor and hungry. So I'm going to read out some passages in Tamil and then give the English translation and make a comment or two. And then once I have gone through the relevant passages, I'll then kind of summarize Vallalar's case, which by then should already be crystal clear. So he starts here, this passage, Sivakarunyatthirkku mukyamana laksham eduvenil. ஆன்மாக்களெல்லாம் இயற்கை உண்மை ஏகதேசங்களாகவும் இயற்கை விளக்கமாகிய அருள் அறிவுக்கறிவாய் விளங்குவதற்கு ஒற்றுமை உரிமை இடங்களாயும் இருக்கின்றன என்றும், அந்த தேகங்களே உரிமையாக இருக்கின்றன என்றும், அந்த தேகங்களில் ஆன்மாக்கள் சீவர்களாகிய அதிகரியாவிடில் ஆன்ம விளக்கம் மறைப்படும் என்றும், அதனால் அருள் விளக்கம் வெளிப்படாதென்றும், அப்போது மூடமுண்டாகும் என்றும், அதுவே ஆன்மாக்களுக்கு பந்தமாகும் என்றும், அது பற்றி அவசியம் பூதகாரிய தேகம் வேண்டும் என்றும். And he goes on. I don't have to pursue the other points here, but this passage, you probably heard me mention it in the context of my talk on reincarnation and other issues. It's a very important passage. What it is saying is, let me read the English translation. Souls, Anmakal, are microcosmic and limited instances. Iyarkai unmai egadesangal. Of that which has intrinsic and inherent existence or reality. So Iyarkai unmai is that which has reality in itself. It is not dependent on anything else. It's not an appearance or illusion or mayajalam. It actually has reality in itself. And the souls, Anmakal, are examples of something like this, something that has intrinsic and inherent existence or reality, Satya. And also they are locations for the expression and illumination of Arul, which, as you know, according to Jivakarnya Varkam, Arul is nothing but Kadavul Dayavu or divine compassion. Now, Arul is always associated with Vilakkam or light. So, Arul is actually, we can translate it as light of divine compassion. And the Anmakal are places for the expression and manifestation of this light of Arul or divine compassion. இயற்கை விளக்கமாகிய அருள் அறிவுக்கறிவாய் விளங்குவதற்கு ஒற்றுமை உரிமை இடங்களாயும் இருக்கின்றன. That is ஆன்மாக்கம். And then he goes on to say, to enable these souls to become living beings or jivarga and develop their capacities, physical bodies, Bhudakarya Degam, that is, bodies which are the results of physical constituents or elements, are essential. அந்த ஆன்மாக்கள் சீவர்களாகி அதிகரிப்பதற்கு பூதகாரிய தேகங்களே உரிமையாக இருக்கின்றன என்றும், அந்த தேகங்களில் ஆன்மாக்கள் சீவர்களாகி அதிகரியாவிடல் ஆன்ம விளக்கம் மறைப்படும் என்றும், அதனால் அருள் விளக்கம் வெளிப்படாது என்றும். These are all very, very important points to keep in mind. Because as practitioners of Samarasa Suddha Sanmargam, or anyone interested in Vallalar's teachings on vegetarianism, we need to really understand why vegetarianism is an essential part. It's not the only thing, but it's an essential part of the practice of Samarasa Suddha Sanmargam. But we need to understand, why it is so, and what is Vallalar's great teaching on it. So, to enable these souls to become living beings and develop their capacities, the Bhudakarya Degangal, or physical bodies, are essential. If the souls do not become living bodies in the appropriate physical bodies and develop their capacities, then the Anma Vilakam, that is the light of the Anma, the light of knowledge that is there in the Anma, will be covered by ignorance. It is there, but it will be covered by ignorance and cannot express itself. And because of that, the Arul Vilakam, or light of divine compassion, will also remain hidden and unexpressed or unmanifested. So, this passage emphasizes the importance of the Degam for Anma Vilakam and Arul Vilakam. I hope that's clear. The Degam is needed for the expression of Anma Vilakam, or the expression manifestation of the light of knowledge that is there in the soul, even if it is covered by the Megangal of ignorance or Anyanam, the light is still there, and in order for that to be expressed, to reveal itself, the Degam is necessary, the body is necessary. Another reason why the body is necessary is that if the light of knowledge that's in the soul is not expressed, then the Arul Vilakam also cannot be expressed. So the body becomes very important because it is the place where the Anma Vilakam, or the light of knowledge in the soul, the illumination of the inherent nature of the soul, and the Arul Vilakam, or light of divine compassion, are both expressed. So that's the great importance of the Bhudakarya Degam, or the physical body. Then he goes on to say, Ella Sivargalukkum Yerkaya Yunmai. This comes later, but I'm quoting it now, and then we'll see the connection with another important point, later on. Ella Sivargalukkum Yerkay Unmai Egadeshangal, Ella Sivargalum Yerkay Unmai Egadeshangalagi, கடவுள் இயற்கை விளக்கமாகிய அருளுக்கு இடமாக இருக்கின்றபடியாலும், again, the Anmakal are places for the expression of the light of divine compassion. கடவுள் இயற்கை விளக்கம் மாறுபடும் போது, that is, when it's withdrawn or when it gets covered or obscured, like sunlight covered by dark clouds, கடவுள் இயற்கை விளக்கம் மாறுபடும் போது சீவத்தன்மை இல்லாதபடியாலும், the light of the soul also is withdrawn, is absent. கடவுள் இயற்கை விளக்கமும் ஜீவன் இயற்கை விளக்கமும் ஒன்றோடொன்று மாறுபடாதலாலும், கடவுள் இயற்கை விளக்கமும் சீவன் இயற்கை விளக்கமும் அந்தந்த தேகங்களிலும் விளங்குகின்றபடியாலும். So again he is emphasizing that in the Degam there is both the Anma Vilakam and the Kadavul Iyarkai Vilakam. That Kadavul Iyarkai Vilakam, he will say, it's only manifested Egadesam, that is partially. It's not fully manifested. If it is fully manifested, then we're not going to have disease, death and all that. It's partially manifested, and it is partially manifested in the Degam because, and he's not talking only about Manida Degam, he's talking about Bhudakarya Degam, any living body, any physical body. And it's manifested because there is that light of the individual soul, Anma, in that body. Well, you can see this actually. Take a human face. Look at photos of human faces, and then look at the photos of animal faces. There is a difference. Some of the animal faces may be cute and all that, but there is a difference. And the subtle difference when you look at it is there is some kind of expression of intelligence, knowledge in the human faces. Of course, some may really be so ignorant that the light, it's covered, but it's still there. But in most human beings, you find that light of awareness. Okay? Another significant proof of this is the ability to speak words, language. We're not just barking and growling, though some human beings do that, but we are speaking words. We use our Y, Naku, and so forth to speak words that communicate knowledge, Arivatta. And so, therefore, the light of the soul can be discerned, that Anma Vilakam can be understood when you reflect on these things. And we know that, there are some human beings that have great spiritual and moral development, and their faces have a certain kind, call them aura of light or brilliance, right? You don't find that in any animal. So this is what Vallalar is talking about. There is something, I'm not saying that you don't find Anma Vilakam in animals. That's not my point, but it's very pronounced in the human being. And to have some understanding of what this Anma Vilakam is, we can look at the human body. Now, it is not absent in the animal bodies. Even the animals also have intelligence. Just look at an ant, Irumbu. How does it find its way around, right? Many insects find their way around. There are bees. The bees have dances. And each dance conveys some kind of information to other bees. And the scientists haven't been able to figure out how exactly they're doing this. Okay? So intelligence, that arivu, is there in all these Degangal. And that's what he's talking about. There is that Anma Vilakam, because the bees are also souls, Anmakal, in that Degam. So the Anma Vilakam will be there, Egadesam. The Anma Vilakam will be there. And then, of course, there is that Karavul Iyarkai Vilakam also in these bodies, even if it is more covered or obscured than in the human body. So this is what Anma Iyarkai Vilakam, Jivan Iyarkai Vilakam, and Karavul Iyarkai Vilakam is all about. And we have to really understand what these terms mean, in order to understand Vallalar's case for vegetarianism. So the Karavul Iyarkai Vilakam is nothing but, he himself says, Karavul Iyarkai Vilakam agya Arulukku. So the Karavul Iyarkai Vilakam is nothing but the light of divine compassion that belongs to the very nature of Karavul, or Arupparanjodi. By definition, Arupparanjodi. So Arul is part of the nature of Arupparanjodi, the holy or light of Arul. And the Jivan Iyarkai Vilakam, Anma Vilakam, is the soul which has it in Egadesam. To a reduced degree or lesser degree, it's the English word is microcosm. It doesn't have everything to the full extent. It has it partially to a lesser degree, as I said, but it's still there. That light of knowledge, in the soul, although it can get covered up pretty seriously by anyanam or ignorance. So these two things, the Degangal, are places or locations in which the Anma Vilakam and Karavul Iyarkai Vilakam can be are manifested. And now that already tells you what is the consequence of destroying or killing a body, right? logically you can deduce it very, very quickly. But we'll get to that now. So this passage that I just read, all living beings are microcosmic and limited instances of that which has inherent or intrinsic reality, and the locations of the light of divine compassion, which is the illumination of the inherent nature of God, Arparanjodi, Kadavul. When the light of divine compassion, Arul, which is the illumination of the inherent nature of God, is absent or is withdrawn or covered, the illumination of the inherent nature of the soul is also absent. Anma Vilakam also gets covered if the Kadavul Iyarkai Vilakam gets covered. He goes on to say that they are not opposed to each other. கடவுள் இயற்கை விளக்கமும் ஜீவன் இயற்கை விளக்கமும் ஒன்றோடொன்று மாறுபடாதலாகவும் கடவுள் இயற்கை விளக்கமும் ஜீவன் இயற்கை விளக்கமும் அந்தந்த தேகங்களிலும் விளங்குகின்றபடியாலும், so they are both manifested in the living bodies, not just the human body, all living bodies. Okay, so that's a key passage. Moving on, மனிதர்களுக்கு ஊழ்வகையினால் அருள் நீதியின்படி கொடுப்பிக்கின்ற ஆகார மட்டில் சீவித்து தேகத்தை வைத்திருக்க கூடாமையாலும் தங்கள் முயற்சியாலும் அறிவாலும் சுதந்திரத்தாலும் சம்பாதிக்கின்ற ஆகாமிய ஆகாரத்தாலும் பசியை நீக்கி தேகத்தை வைத்திருக்க வேண்டுமாதலாலும் what he's saying here is human beings cannot maintain their physical bodies merely on what is provided for them in nature. இயற்கையில் பழம், காய் and so forth. That's what he means by ஊழ்வகையினால் அருள் நியதியின்படி கொடுப்பிக்கின்ற ஆகாரம். What we can find in nature, kurangu, this, that and the other, leaves and so forth, fruit. We cannot maintain our bodies simply on that basis. We also need to obtain food which is the product and produce of our effort. This is, cultivation, agriculture, manufacturing, and most importantly, cooking. So we have rice, wheat, flour, legumes of various kinds of beans, parupu vagaigal, vegetable fruits, milk, curds. These things we have to manufacture, you see, we have to produce. Curds, definitely you have to manufacture. You're not simply going to get curds unless you stir the milk and so on and so forth. Same thing for butter and all that. So human beings also need this other kind of food that they produce by cultivation, manufacturing, and cooking. And both are needed to remove hunger and maintain our physical bodies. ஊழ்வகைக்கு தக்கப்படி மிருகம் முதலிய சீவர்களுக்கு அருளால் நியதி ஆகாரம் மாத்திரம் இருக்க மனிதர்களுக்கு மாத்திரம் ஊழ் நியதி ஆகாரத்தோடு ஆகாமிய முயற்சி ஆகாரமும் வேண்டுவது அவசியம் என்றது எப்படி என. So why is it the case that for human beings the food that we can find in nature is not enough? We have to produce food by our efforts, agriculture and all that kind of stuff, and eat that food in order to maintain our bodies. Well, I think we can talk about the nutritional content and all of that kind of stuff of this other type of food. Maybe also suitability, our digestive system and so forth. They can't simply handle just the food that we find in nature. That's why I guess human beings turn to farming, the agriculture, production of rice, wheat and all that, and cooking, most important. We consume cooked food. And even when we take things from nature, we prepare them. We just don't simply take raw food, although sometimes that's done, but you can't subsist exclusively on that. So, மனிதர்கள் பிராரத்தப்படி நீதி ஆகாரத்தை, that is நீதி ஆகாரம் what's found in nature, in raw form, புசித்து பிராரத்த அனுபவத்தை நீக்கிக் கொண்டு ஆகாமியத்தால் முயற்சி ஆகாரத்தை புசித்து கர்ணேந்திரிய தேகத்தை வலுவுள்ளதாக செய்து கொண்டு சன்மார்க்க சாதனத்தை அனுசரித்து சித்தி முத்தி இன்பங்களை பெறக்கடவர் என்று கடவுள் விதித்திருக்கின்றபடியால் மனிதர்களுக்கு பிராரத்த ஆகாரமும் ஆகாமிய முயற்சி ஆகாரமும் அவசியம் வேண்டும் என்று அறிய வேண்டும். So he's basically saying, in accordance with divine law, divine will, கடவுள் அருளாக்கினை, we can't just simply live just on prarabdha agar, nirya agar, although we need it, but we can't just survive on that. So we have to make the effort and, produce bread, rice, this, that, and the other, cook them and all that, and as he says, agaratte, agamiyatal muyurchi agaratte, that is the food that's produced by effort, manufacturing, cultivation, manufacturing, cooking, and so forth. That is something we consume in order to obtain karnendriya degatte valulladaga seidu kondu. So it's necessary to fortify, nurture, nourish, and fortify the bodies, to make the bodies strong, so that we can practice sanmargam, the path of sanmargam, and attain the bliss or joys of liberation, mukti, and siddhi or adulthood. And that's why for us, both the prarabdha agaram, or what is found in raw form in nature, as well as agamiya murchi agaram, what we produce by cultivation, manufacturing, cooking, etc., both are needed. So the translation is, it is in accordance with divine law that human beings should eat both raw food found in nature, fruits, honey, and food which is grown or cultivated, rice and so forth, manufactured, processed, and cooked, in order to keep their bodies strong, pursue the disciplines, sarmarga sadhanam, disciplines of the path of Siddha Sanmargam, and attain the bliss or joys of liberation, mukti, and siddhi, adulthood. Hence, both the raw food found in nature and the food they cultivate, manufacture, and cook are essential for human beings. So all this is, of course, preparing the ground and the background for Vallalar's main argument on vegetarianism that I will come to. So the next important passage, மனிதர்கள் தங்கள் வாழ்க்கைக்கு சகாயமாக சம்பாதிக்கின்ற உயிர்களில் சில உயிர்கள் தாமச ஆகாரமாகிய மாமிச ஆகாரம் செய்வதானால் அவைகளுக்கு பசியாற்றுவிக்கும் போது அந்த ஆகாரத்தை கொடுத்து ஆற்றுவிக்கப்படாதோ எனில். That is to say, he does mention Pune and Nai later on, so maybe he had Pune and Nai in mind that the human beings use, so, or maybe it's Kori and so forth, hens, we use hens for eggs and all that. So when you use these other animals that live on tamasa agara, Pune and Nai and so forth, should we not give tamasa agaram as a key concept here? In fact, that's central to Vallalar's argument for vegetarianism, his argument against non-vegetarianism. Tamasa agaram. So we have to understand what tamasam is. You probably know tamasam is a gunam. It's a quality. And in Indian thought, philosophical thought, there are three basic qualities of nature that you can find in nature. Sattva, that's harmony, and balance, and in psychological terms, it's knowledge, including spiritual intelligence and knowledge. Then we have tamas, rajasam, which is passion, desire, assertion, and so forth. And then we have tamasam, which is darkness, ignorance. So in psychological terms, again, it's ignorance, depression, inactivity, and so forth. And by talking about tamasa agaram, he is talking about basically an agaram or food, tamasic food, is food that has the quality of tamas or darkness or ignorance. Its attribute is ignorance, ajnanam, iru. Okay, and we'll see later on why meat and chicken and all that kind of stuff is an example. Fish and all that, basically animal flesh, is tamasa agaram. That is agaram or food permeated by the quality of tamas, or that of darkness and ignorance. But anyway, this passage is raising the question as to why we shouldn't feed dogs and cats and so forth with the meat, because that's what they usually live on. And Vallalar gives a reply. ஒரு சீவனை கொன்று, and this is basically his essential objection to meat eating. ஒரு சீவனை கொன்று ஒரு சீவனுக்கு மாமிசத்தால் பசியாற்றுதல் சீவகாருண்ய ஒழுக்கமே அல்லவென்றும் கடவுள் சம்மதமும் அல்லவென்றும் இவைகட்கு முழு விரோதம் என்றும் அறிய வேண்டும். Once again, ஒரு சீவனை கொன்று ஒரு சீவனுக்கு மாமிசத்தால் பசியாற்றுதல் சீவகாருண்ய ஒழுக்கமே அல்லவென்றும் கடவுள் சம்மதமும் அல்லவென்றும் இவைகட்கு முழு விரோதம் என்றும் அறிய வேண்டும். In other words, his answer is absolutely not. That means you shouldn't give meat, you shouldn't feed meat and so forth to dogs and cats or any other creatures that you may be domesticating. Because to kill a living being and use its body or flesh as food to remove the hunger of another living being is absolutely not the practice of the ethic of compassion and not approved by God, Kadavu, and is completely opposed to both. It is opposed to virodham, that is, it is opposed to the practice of the ethic of compassion and the approval of God. So here we can see that Vallalar is referring to what is known as divine command, Kadavul Arulakkinai. And he is also acknowledging that human beings have the freedom to go against Kadavul Samadam to a limited extent, of course. Human beings cannot change the laws of nature. There are many things that human beings cannot change, and we can also argue will never be able to change, but they have limited freedom, and that's because of the nature of the Anma, or the soul. By virtue of the nature of the soul, which is essentially consciousness and a microcosm of the divine existence, partial manifestation of the divine existence or reality, we have some freedom. We have even the freedom to go against Kadavul Samadam, to go against Arulakane. And in fact, we have been exercising that kind of freedom, and that's why, we are afflicted by various kinds of sufferings. So, killing a living being, which is what meat-eating non-vegetarianism is all about, and using its flesh as food, even if you're doing that to remove the hunger of another living being, whether it's a human being or another animal, he's saying categorically that's not the practice of the ethic of compassion, and it's also not approved by God, and completely opposed to both. This is basically his essential argument against non-vegetarianism. We can look at why it is so, why it is not the practice of the ethic, why it's contrary to the Jivakarnya Workam, and why it is contrary to Kadavul Samadam. It's quite clear that when you kill a living being, you are subjecting it to the worst kind of torture, torment. And remember, it's an Anma in a body, and by killing that body, by actually, you have to kill it, that's a form of torture and torment, causing suffering. You're basically expelling the soul, and thereby you're bringing about the Maraitho of the Anma Vilakam. And when the Anma Vilakam is, covered, Maraithal is covered or obscured, then the Kadavul Vilakam also is covered or obscured. And of course, that can't possibly be Kadavul Samadam to have its own light obscured or covered by this act of Imsai. Actually, he calls it Imsai Agaram. And he's correct. It's Imsai because, as you know from all these horrible accounts of how these animals are put together in horrible conditions and then slaughtered I once saw something and I almost had a heart attack. It was, I think, in Singapore. It was a beef factory. And this fellow had a huge hammer, and this poor cow was right in front of him, looking innocently at him, and he was breaking its skull as it was alive. And I just saw, and I couldn't take. I almost had a heart attack, and I had to exit the YouTube. You could see the blood covering all of its face with the blows of the hammer. That's how they may, and all these characters go and sit and order beef and this, that, and the other, and throw it into their stomachs. They don't consider how it has come to their table. Yeah, it's all dressed up and packaged in a very attractive way, but essentially it's an imsai agaram. It's food that's come about as a result of inflicting torment, suffering, and killing on a living being, especially something that's so lovable and helpful as a cow. Gives us milk, butter, and so forth, as well as provides manure for the soil. And how do we reciprocate? We break its head with a huge hammer while it's still alive, see? And then we cut its body and then package it. And the ignorance of people, India, I'll be talking about it later, India has a very important role to play in the Sanmarga column, or age of Sanmargam, and the promotion of healthful, nutritious, body enhancing, strengthening vegetarian food. And it's really very sad that you find so many people in India now, they all think that, it's almost a matter of pride. And Vivekananda really contributed to this mischief. I'm a meat eater. And they actually laugh at, vegetarians. You can probably see some people laughing at vegetarians, as though they're somehow lacking in manliness or something. It's some kind of perverted notion of manliness or strength. And my short response to them is, take a look at the gorilla. Yeah, gorilla is a vegetarian, so I'm very proud to be a vegetarian. Okay, so it's really nonsense to associate vegetarianism with weakness of the body and mind, as Vivekananda unfortunately did. And we can see the greatness of Vallalar and the clarity of his mind, the spiritual intelligence shining forth. 1867, he makes a very persuasive argument that what is fundamentally wrong with meat eating, including eating poultry, chicken, and so forth, fish also, is because you're killing a living being and using its flesh as food. And in the process, you have inflicted suffering and, torment and suffering, but also deprived that anma or soul of a body and temporarily suppressed the anma vilakam and kadavul iyarkai vilakam. So, moving on, ella sivargalum iyarkai unmai egadeshangalagi kadavul iyarkai vilakamagiya. This is the same passage that I quoted earlier, but I'm going to repeat it with the sentence that I left out, which is relevant now. Ella sivargalum iyarkai unmai egadeshangalagi kadavul iyarkai vilakamagiya arulukku idamaga irugindrapadiyalum கடவுள் இயற்கை விளக்கம் மாறுபடும் போது சீவத்தன்மை இல்லாதபடியாலும் கடவுள் இயற்கை விளக்கமும் ஜீவன் இயற்கை விளக்கமும் ஒன்றோடொன்று மாறுபடாதலாகவும் கடவுள் இயற்கை விளக்கமும் சீவன் இயற்கை விளக்கமும் அந்தந்த தேகங்களிலும் விளங்குகின்றபடியாலும் ஒரு சீவனை வதைத்து, this is the key sentence, ஒரு சீவனை வதைத்து அதனால் மற்றொரு சீவனுக்கு பசியாற்றுதல் சீவகாரண்ய ஒழுக்கத்திற்கு முழு விரோதம் என்றே அறிய வேண்டும். That is to say, to torture, torment, and kill a living being and use its flesh or body to remove the hunger of another living being is completely opposed to the ethic of compassion. Of course, because Jivakarunyam, or the ethic of compassion, is all about preventing or removing or curing the suffering of a living being. So if you're actually doing the opposite, it's clearly opposed to the ethic of compassion or Jivagarnya Workam. which is what killing an animal for food involves. You know, it's quite horrifying. I mean, in YouTube, I don't quite recommend that you really look at these Kurura Sayalgal, but at least to understand something, you know, you need to take a very brief look. Horrible conditions, horrible suffering that is inflicted on these living beings. That's why the great French writer Victor Hugo said, animals are already living in hell. And that's the hell that's created for them, largely by human beings. You just have to look up the statistics on the poultry that's killed, the number of cows and pigs that are slaughtered and so forth, just to have an idea of how mind-boggling it is. This slaughter is going on a huge scale. ஒரு சீவனை வதைத்து அதனால் மற்றொரு சீவனுக்கு பசியாற்றுதல் is going on such a huge scale. Then Vallalar goes on, and I'm going to be finished with a couple of paragraphs here, passages. புலி சிங்கம் முதலிய மிருகங்கள் மற்றொரு சீவனை கொன்று தின்று தாமச ஆகாரத்தால் பசியாற்றி சுத்தி இன்பத்தை அடைந்து சந்தோஷிக்கின்றன. அந்த சந்தோஷம் கடவுள் இயற்கை விளக்க ஏகதேசமும் சீவன் இயற்கை விளக்க நிறைவும் என்று கொள்ளக்கூடாதோ என்னில். So the question is, we have wild beasts like lions and tigers that kill other animals and eat them. Their food is tamasa agaram, food that is tamasic, permeated by the quality of darkness and ignorance, because it is the result of killing that living being, which results in the concealment of the Anma Vilakam or light of the soul, and prevents the manifestation of Kadavul Iyarkai Vilakam or the light of Arul, light of divine compassion. That's why it's Tamasagaram. But the Puli and Singam, the tigers and lions, eat such food and they seem to get satisfaction. We could also add many human beings also seem to get satisfaction by consuming this tamasa agar, right? The meat eaters and so forth. How do you explain this? Is this not anma vilakam, this tripti or sandosham or happiness or satisfaction that comes from eating meat and removing their hunger? Is this not the light of the soul? Expressing itself or manifesting itself, and the divine light, Kadavul Iyarkai Vilakam, also manifesting itself. Now, Vallalar then replies. He says, "No, kudadu, because tamasa agarathal purana sattuvamagiya Kadavul Iyarkai Vilakka egadesamum egadesa sattuvamagiya Anma Iyarkai Vilakkamum vilanga." தாமச ஆகாரத்தால் பூரண சத்துவமாகிய கடவுள் இயற்கை விளக்க ஏகதேசமும் ஏகதேச சத்துவமாகிய ஆன்ம இயற்கை விளக்கமும் விளங்கா இருளால் ஒளி விளங்காதது போ. So the translation of the whole passage is this: what about wild beasts such as lions and tigers, which kill another living being and eat the tamasic food of meat from those killed beings and seem to derive happiness or satisfaction from consuming such food? You can also add many human beings are doing that and seem to have that same satisfaction from consuming such food. Should we not consider that this satisfaction is an expression of the partial small degree of illumination by the light of divine compassion, divine nature, and the illumination of the soul? Anma Iyarkai Vilakam. Vallalar's reply is not at all, because tamasic food, which you will remember is the food that is that has this quality of tamas or darkness or ignorance, the withdrawal of the light of the soul or Anma Vilakam and divine light or Kadavul Vilakam. Such tamasic food cannot express the illumination of the soul or partial illumination in the soul of the divine light, Kadavul Vilakam. It's just like darkness lacking the property of illumination, right? Darkness does not produce light. So in just the same way, whatever satisfaction these wild beasts get by killing another living being and eating its flesh, or human beings who eat that kind of flesh, whatever satisfaction they get is not really the manifestation of the light of the soul or the light of divine reality or Aru. To say that it is an expression or manifestation of the light of the soul, Anma Vilakam, or the light of divine reality or Kadavul Vilakam would be like saying darkness gives light. That's a contradiction in terms, right? Darkness cannot light anything in its very nature. And therefore, the tamasic food is like that. It has this property of darkness and ignorance. And when you reflect on how the tamasic food is obtained, it should be very clear why it has that quality of tamas, why he calls it tamasic food. And Vallalar, in fact, goes on then to give that reason. இதை தாமச ஆகாரம் என்பது என்ன எனில் கடவுள் விளக்கம் வெளிப்படாதபடி ஆன்ம விளக்கத்தை மறைத்த இம்சை ஆகாரமாதலால் தாமசம் ஆகாரம் ஆயிற்று. Again, இதை தாமச ஆகாரம் என்பது என்ன எனில் கடவுள் விளக்கம் வெளிப்படாதபடி ஆன்ம விளக்கத்தை மறைத்த இம்சை ஆகாரமாதலால் தாமச ஆகாரம் ஆயிற்று. What he is saying is, it is tamasic food because it prevents the manifestation of divine light, and it is now obscured by killing that body and expelling the soul. It has also prevented the manifestation of the light of the soul. Therefore, that flesh that you are eating, which came from inflicting the torment and suffering and expelling the anma from that body, is imsayagaram. That is a food that's obtained by inflicting torment, suffering, torture. It's the result of torture of a living being, which is the anma in that body, has been subjected to the murder or killing, and that's the kind of food that you're getting out of that act. That's why it is tamasic, or characterized by darkness and ignorance, which simply means absence of anma valakam, or light of the soul, and therefore also the absence of kadavuliyarke valakam, or divine light, which is the light of Arul valakam. So, why is it tamasic food? The meat of slaughtered living bodies is tamasic food because it is the product of obscuring the soul's, covering or obscuring the soul's illumination, its light, by killing the body, which was its location, and thereby also preventing the outward expression, emergence, or manifestation of the divine light or illumination in that soul and body. And because it produces mudam, this action produces mudam, or ignorance, it is tamasic food, and it shares that property of darkness or ignorance because of the actions which have resulted in the production of this tamasic food, torturing, tormenting, and killing a living being, which is essentially a soul in a body. Then the question he asks is, well, if that is so, how do you explain the satisfaction, sandosham, that these beings, including human beings, many human beings, get from eating this tamasic food, meat and so forth? They do get satisfaction. You know, some of them will make all kinds of sounds eating it, and give other expressions to their satisfaction. How do you explain this? What is that satisfaction expressing? If it is not expressing anma valakam, or light of the soul, or the divine light, then what is it expressing? He says, anadi pasukaruna maya valakam endru ariya vendum. So the translation, what then is the source or cause of the satisfaction obtained by wild beasts such as lions and tigers in consuming this tamasic food? And as I said, many human beings too, who are non-vegetarians, It is the elimination of the impure senses, sense organs constituted by impure matter, asuttamaya, of a soul or pasu, bound in ignorance. Anadi pasu karana maya valakkam. We always, when we encounter such highly literate expressions in Vallalar, we have to break the terms down into their respective component words and then understand what he's actually talking about. Anadi pasukarana maya valakkam. And often Vallalar will himself explain, as he does here. But what he is saying is that sandosham comes from the elimination of the impure senses, the gratification of impure senses or sense organs, naak and the stomach and so forth. They're all made of asuttamaya or impure matter because they have various impurities and they are subject to decay and dissolution, as well as deficiency, disease, and all that. That's why we say it's asuttamaya. So the senses that are made of asuttamaya, they are reflecting this. It's a reflection of the satisfaction that is experienced in these sense organs constituted by impure matter, in which this pasu is bound. And what is this pasu? In Saiva Siddhanta, pasu is the soul that has lost its spiritual intelligence and knowledge because of its bondage to egotism, anavam, attachment to material stuff, which is maya, and karma or karma. That, I guess, includes all of us. We are all pasus. We have lost our spiritual intelligence and knowledge because we have succumbed to egotism or anavam, maya or attachment to physical body and material things, and karma. But fortunately, the Arul has brought us into contact with the teachings of this great spiritual master, Vallalar, Chidambaram Ramalingam, and at least so we have at least some signposts, we have at least a map, as I said in a previous talk, of how to find our way back. But anyway, that's the pasu, and that pasu is in this body made of asuttamaya, and the consumption of meat is simply the satisfaction that comes from consuming meat is simply the reflection of something that is gratification that the impure senses have undergone. Gratification by means of these impure senses, and that's what you see as the satisfaction. It is not really the Anma Vilakam, and it is not really the Kadavul Yatra Vilakam, which you see in the satisfaction that comes when we remove hunger by eating Sattva Unavu or vegetarian food. That is food that is characterized by the quality of light and knowledge. That is sattva. So it's a kind of interesting explanation of the difference in the nature of the satisfaction that is produced on the one hand by eating meat and so forth, non-vegetarian food, and on the other hand the vegetarian food. And Vallalar is claiming that apparently it looks like the same satisfaction, but actually when you examine it, which is what he has done, you will see that their sources are different. The satisfaction that comes from eating sattva unavu, the food that's characterized by the quality of sattva, the vegetarian food, That satisfaction is simply the reflection of the Anma Vilakam or light of the soul and the Kadavul Iyarkai Vilakam or divine light in the body. But the satisfaction that comes from eating imsai agaram, tamasa unavu, that is meat and so forth, obtained by killing the living being, that is actually simply a kind of a pale light cast by the impure senses, anadi pasukarana maya vadakam. Then he asks, where does this anadi pasukarana velakam come from? He asks that question. A pasuvirku velakam thondruvathu eppadi enil? Right? This soul that is pasu, that is bound in ignorance, and in the body of impure matter, it's consuming this imsai agaram, tamasu unavu, non-vegetarian food. How come it is still getting that satisfaction? And Vallalar says, Suryanai maraitha mega vannathil irulinidathum Surya pragasa viseshan thondrudalal avirulum velakamaga varangugiன்றது. That is, even though sunlight has been covered by dark clouds, the clouds still have some light within them. As we can all see, the clouds still are illuminated. It's as though there's a kind of torch inside that cloud, and that's, of course, the sunlight. So they have not been able to completely cover up that sunlight, and that's why even these very dark clouds seem to have some light within them. In the same way, asuttamaya karanangalum tamasagunamum irul vannamudaya vainum tammal maraikkapatta parasiva vilakka viseshathal asuttamaya karanamum tamasagunamum vilakkamaga varanguகின்றன. இதனால் தாமச ஆகத்தில் வரும் விளக்கம் அசுத்தமாயா கரண விளக்கமே என்று அறிய வேண்டும். It's simply the light of the asuttamaya karanam, the senses constituted by impure matter, the body and so forth. There's the process of consumption, of meat, produces this reflection of satisfaction. It is not really the satisfaction that comes from the light of the soul. It's not the satisfaction that reflects the Anma Vilakam or the light of the soul and the divine light or Kadavul Iyarkai Vilakam. So that's something for you to reflect on and consider. But, I think it's quite persuasive because of the nature of the food. See, how can these, from a spiritual point of view, how can the food that's sattvam, that is not produced by inflicting cruelty, torture, and killing on another living being, how can the satisfaction of consuming such food, sattvic food, vegetarian food, come from the same source as the consumption of tamasa agaram or imsai agaram or non-vegetarian food, which by its very nature comes from torturing, tormenting, imposing suffering, and killing a living being, and expelling the anma from that body, and thereby obscuring the Anma Vilakam, light of the soul, and Kadavul Iyarkai Vilakam or divine light in that body, right? It doesn't make any sense. How can they both be the same kind of satisfaction or have the same cause or source? So I think it's very convincing, the argument. And that's his explanation, that's his answer to the question, how come lions and tigers and also many human beings derive satisfaction by consuming tamasa agaram, non-vegetarian food, which in its very nature is obtained by torturing, tormenting, and killing a living being and eating its flesh or body parts. So I find it quite persuasive. The significant difference in the nature of the food must mean that the source of satisfaction also must come from different sources. So the translation, how then can the pasu or soul experience satisfaction from consuming tamasic food or non-vegetarian food? In just the way the dark clouds are illuminated from within by the sunlight they have covered or obscured, the senses constituted by impure matter and tamas, or the quality of darkness and ignorance, still reflect within themselves the inherent light of the soul and that of the divine nature they have covered, obscured, or eclipsed. Thus, it should be known that the satisfaction illumination produced by the consumption of tamasic food is the illumination of the senses constituted by impure matter. Yeah, if you ask how come these senses can give that illumination or satisfaction, right? We're saying it's asuttamaya karanam. How can that asuttamaya karanam produce that sandosham or tripti? And he's saying that's because even the asuttamaya karanam is covering, like the dark clouds, the Anma Vilakam and the Kadavul Yerke Vilakam. They're still there, even though they have been obscured. That's why these Asuttamaya Karanangal, the senses of the impure matter, constituted by impure matter, are still able to yield some kind of satisfaction, as a result of consuming Imsaya Agaram, Tamasa Agaram, or non-vegetarian food characterized by these qualities of darkness and ignorance. So now, of course, so I think so far he's made a pretty good case against non-vegetarian food, and it's actually a kind of spiritual argument. I mean, there's an ethical argument and there's a spiritual argument. The ethical argument is it's contrary to Jivakaranya Workam, or practice of compassion, because you are subjecting a living being to suffering, and in fact the worst form of suffering, which is killing and then eating its dead body and body parts. The spiritual argument is, by doing so, you have prevented the expression of the Anma Vilakam, or the light of the soul, and thereby the divine light, or the light of the divine being in that body. And so, when you do that, the result is mudam, darkness, tamasam, darkness and ignorance. And you're eating the material or stuff that is shot through, imbued with, or characterized by this darkness and ignorance. Right? That's what makes tamasa agara. The two are related, of course. He mentions that it's imsaya agaram. That means you have subjected the living being to torture and the suffering of death, and of course, that is contrary to compassion. So these are the two main kinds of reasons that Vallalar gives against non-vegetarian food. And both of them, especially if you accept some of the statements, on these Anma and Degam, and how the Degam is a place for the expression or manifestation of Anma Vilakam and Kadavul Yerke Vilakam. That's why I started with those passages. You can see how logically organized Vallalar's presentation is. It's, our loss that this work was not completed in all its parts, but at least what we have, we can see, assuming that the copies were faithful to the original, which I think there's no reason to doubt that they were faithful to the original. We can see how logically organized his case is. So you can see the Anma Drishti, the spiritual intelligence and wisdom, in how Vallalar makes his case. So as I said, it's both an ethical argument and also a spiritual argument against non-vegetarianism, or the eating of animal flesh, including poultry and fish and so forth. Now, that's a pretty persuasive case. The two types of arguments, moral argument that it's against Jivakarnya Varkam, and the spiritual argument that it's actually Tamasa Agaram, that should be enough. But then, the non-vegetarians can come up with some objections, and Vallalar anticipates it in response, which is again quite remarkable. And even today you find non-vegetarians raising these objections. And if you encounter them, and I'll be making a post in my blog developing this, I'm only giving you a kind of introduction here, we have to present them with Vallalar's replies to the objections he already anticipated. So the first is this. And it's important that we don't misunderstand this paragraph. So the paragraph goes, Anal maram pul del mudalana davarangalum uiragave sollapaduginnanave, அவைகளை இம்சை செய்த ஆகாரமாக கொண்டால் அவை தாமச ஆகாரம் அல்லவோ, அதனால் வந்த சந்தோஷம் அசுத்த மனோகரண சந்தோஷம் அல்லவோ எனில், மரம் புல் நெல் முதலான தாவரங்களும் உயிர்கள் தான், அவைகளை இம்சை செய்த ஆகாரம் கொண்டால் அது ஏகதேச தாமச ஆகாரம் தான், அந்த ஆகாரத்தால் வந்த சந்தோஷமும் அசுத்த காரண சந்தோஷம்தான். Now if you read this, you're going to then say, if you don't read further, oh what, so he's accepting that even vegetarian food is tamasic food, because they are killing plants and trees, right? And they are living beings. We certainly view them as souls in Sudasan Margam. They are in bodies, and as Vallalar says, they are or arivu jivargal. That means they have cognition only by touch. They have only one sensory form of cognition, organ of cognition. But they're still souls in those bodies. If we read this paragraph, we might think, oh, he's saying yes, killing living beings is all, well, he's saying killing living beings is not different from killing trees and plants is not different from killing animals. And if you eat plants and trees that are killed, then that's no different from eating the bodies of the animals you've killed. But then he says that is not the case when you eat vegetarian food. So he says, Analum appariyalla. That's the key sentence. Maram pul nel mudalana சீவர்கள் பரிசம் என்கின்ற ஓரறிவுடைய சீவர்களாகலாலும், trees, plants, rice plants, crops have only one sense organ or mode of knowledge by touch or contact. அவ்வுடம்பில் சீவ விளக்கம் ஒருசார் விளங்குதலாலும், அவ்வுயிர்கள் தோன்றும் வித்துக்களும் மற்ற வித்துக்கள் போல் சடமாதலாலும், the illumination of the soul is only very partially manifested in them, in these bodies, plants and trees. And the cause of, what I was saying was the vittukal or seeds are the cause of the development of trees and plants, which are bodies. They don't contain the anma. The seed doesn't contain a soul. It doesn't contain a living being. It is simply the cause for the development of that plant body or tree body. And therefore, if you consume the seed, it's not like killing a living being and eating its body. It's not like that. And he says that the vegetables, leaves, fruits, and seeds are not living bodies in themselves. They are not virgal. They are organic material. So this is the confusion that the non-vegetarians fall into. The fruit or the vegetable is not a living entity. It's organic, meaning it is subject to decay and all that. But that doesn't mean it's a living being. The living being is the anma. Only the soul is the living being. And the fruit or the vegetable does not have the soul. What has the soul is the tree or the plant. And when vegetarians consume seeds, nuts, fruits, leaves, vegetables, and so forth, they are not killing the tree. As long as you're not killing the tree or plant, you are not doing anything contrary to Jivakarnya Varkam or the ethic of compassion. And if the objection is that by taking the fruit or vegetable and so forth, you are causing pain to the plant, that objection can also be concocted. This is no different from cutting the throat of a chicken. You're pulling the vegetable and the fruit of the plant or the tree. You're causing suffering. Well, Vallalar has already given reasons to think that this is not the case. Because they have only one sense, they don't have, as he says, the development of mind and other senses that are required to experience pain or suffering. And he says when you take leaves, fruits, vegetables, etc. from trees or plants without destroying them, it's similar to cutting hair and nails. You don't feel any pain when hair and nails are cut, and he's saying that's similar to what happens. That's the case when you cut the fruit or the vegetable. You're not causing any suffering, to the plant or tree. And remember, he's also, I think, very convincingly, he makes the convincing claim that there is no developed cognitive system, like a mind and so forth, in the plant or tree. There is some response by sensation, by touch, which you can measure by electrical impulses, but they don't have a brain, they don't have a nervous system, and other senses that are required to experience pain or suffering. Okay? So this is also evident from the physiology of the plant and the tree, and therefore when you take the seeds, nuts, vegetables, and fruits from them, first, you're not killing the plant or the tree, and second, you're not really causing pain or suffering. And for these two reasons, we can quite safely conclude that you're not doing anything contrary to Jivagaranya Workam. It's only when you are killing a living being, expelling the soul from the living body by killing the body, or by subjecting it to torment and torture, in the process of killing it, you're acting contrary to Jivagaranya Workam or the ethic of compassion. Neither of these two conditions are there when you consume fruits, when you take leaves, fruits, vegetables, and so forth. Therefore, vegetarian food is completely in agreement with the ethic of compassion, Jivagaranya Workam, and we can say Kadavul Sammadam because it does not kill a living being and prevent the expression of the Anma Vilakam or light of the soul and the divine light or Kadavul Yerke Vilakam. It does not happen at all when you consume vegetarian food. Again, as long as you're not killing the tree or plant. Therefore, and also with milk, which Vallalar emphasizes, and as I said, if it works out, January sometime, I can give a presentation on Siddha Sanmargam diet. It's actually worthy of a book. Milk is a very important part of it, and Vallalar has emphasized it in the Agaval verses, and also in some of the Upadesa Kuripugal or notes on teachings. Which of course we have to use critical thinking. We can't simply accept everything there. But milk is strongly recommended, and when you take milk from a cow, you're not harming the cow. Of course, in some conditions, maybe the cow is subjected to torture, maybe the calf is deprived. If we become aware that there are these conditions, then we should not take milk from that particular source. It doesn't mean we should not take milk at all. It's like, if you know that a sack of rice came to a store because of slave labor, okay, so you boycott the store. It doesn't mean you boycott rice. You simply boycott that store because of its unethical practices. So in the same way, we can easily find out by looking up the company that produces your milk can and so forth, what kind of practices that they are engaging in, and if they're not engaging in any cruel practices, then it's okay to get the milk, or if they are, then you get it from another source. That's all. It doesn't mean we have to abandon milk And a lot of studies have now come out showing that vegans have issues with bone health, bone strength and health. And they attribute it in large part to calcium deficiency. And we know that if you don't consume milk and you don't have any proper replacement or substitute for pal or milk, then you're going to develop those kinds of issues. That's why I think, Vallalar's wisdom was such that he recommended Padapada Kaichya Pal. That's milk that's boiled well, and so forth, as well as milk products like Thair, Ney, and so forth. In any case, so even in that case, when you take milk from a cow, and things like dairy products, as long as the cows have been treated without cruelty, it's okay to use them, and naturally, obviously, you're not killing the cow. Therefore, it's not contrary to the practice of the ethic of compassion. So, the consumption of seeds, fruits, leaves, vegetables, and so forth does not involve destruction of their sources, which is the bodies of the plants and trees, and in the case of milk, the bodies of the cow or the goat, as the case may be. And it does not subject them to suffering or pain. In the case of trees and plants, there is no question of any pain or suffering, because they don't have the senses that are required, karanangal, that are required for experiencing something like pain or suffering. And when you take the fruit or vegetable, it's like cutting nails or hair, doesn't cause any pain. In just the same way, it doesn't cause any pain to the tree or plant. Therefore, it's not contrary to the ethic of compassion to be a vegetarian. So this is, I think, a very brilliant response, very insightful response. And, think about it. 1867, Vallalar has given this response. And I think it's a fairly it's a kind of knockdown argument. I don't see what the non-vegetarians can come up with. Well, Vallalar goes on. Maybe there's one or two other objections that I'll briefly address, and then I'll close this talk. He says that there are other remarks he makes that I don't want to get into right now. But he does conclude this section by saying, Agalil maram pul nel mudaliyavaigalin vittu kai kani thari mudaliyavattrai pusippadu sivakaranya virodhamalla endru ariya vendum. And, he could have also made the case, but he didn't make it here. It does not prevent the manifestation of Anma Vilakam, nor does it prevent the manifestation of divine light, which are in any way only partially present in the Davara Vargam, because they only have Or Arivu, and they are very limited body systems, cognitive systems. So it's only partially manifested. They're still Jivargal, they're still Anmakal or souls. You can't just treat them as objects, and that's why in Samasa Suddha Sanmargam, we have an obligation to refrain as far as we can from destruction of trees and plants, and to water them. If you have a backyard and so forth, and you have certain plants and trees, you should water them and give them proper, subsistence material, soil and that kind of stuff. What's called plant food. So it's not at all contrary to the ethic of compassion, Jivaganya Vurkam, to have vegetarian food, which by its very nature is also Tattva Unavu. It's not Tamasa Unavu, it's a Sattva Unavu or Sattvic food. Because there is no maraital or concealment or prevention of the expression of the light of the Anma in that body, plant or tree body, and the manifestation of divine light, however partial it is. in that plant or tree body, right? So the non-vegetarian objection that the vegetarians are not doing anything different completely collapses. Where the non-vegetarians can come up with some other objections. Let me just run through them. I can't discuss them in detail. So one is the nutrition argument, right? The non-vegetarians will say, oh, and you know, Vivekananda succumbed to this misconception too. A lack of nutrition. You know, vegetarian food will make your body weak and then you'll succumb to disease and so forth. You know, that's why I quoted those lines from Vallalar about the importance of the vegetarian food in nourishing and strengthening the body so we can practice on the path of Samarasa Siddha Sanmargam. You know, and you know, he constantly emphasizes the importance of keeping the body healthy and strong. Vegate pakuvamaga paratti varavendum, vegate valulladaga vittirka vendum, and so forth. And he knew what he was talking about when he emphasized vegetarian food. Well, he also cataloged herbs and things like that, which also come into the picture, and I'll discuss it when I talk about Siddha Sanmarga Unabu or diet. But right now, the non-vegetarian objection that vegetarianism does not provide the nutrition that is required for health and preventing deficiencies and diseases, again, has no basis. We're talking about vegetarianism. Remember, milk and dairy products are allowed. And I think that muttai, or eggs that are unfertilized and that do not have any living being in it, that's growing, is also fine, as long as it doesn't have a sisu, an embryo that's developing. It's fine. You're not killing life by taking unfertilized eggs, which contain a lot of protein, by the way. And Vallalar never says muttai, you know, he probably didn't take muttai, and probably the Satya Dharmasala did not, you know, make omelets or anything like that. But there's nothing where he says you shouldn't consume it, and there's nothing in what he says that excludes taking or prohibits taking eggs that are unfertilized. It's the same reason. The vegetable or fruit is organic material, but it's not a living being. The same way the muttai, that's unfertilized, does not have a living being. The fertilized egg obviously has a living being that's going to develop and come out as a chicken, or whatever it is, ostrich or whatever. So you cannot eat those type of eggs that actually contain a developing embryo. But the muttai that doesn't have that is simply organic material, and we can consume it if that's required for nutrition. So the nutrition argument also falls flat. There's really nothing in vegetarian diet, and we're using vegetarian diet to include, you know, medicines from vegetarian sources, artificial sources that are not non-vegetarian, vitamins and minerals and so forth. There's all kinds of artificial supplements that can also be used as long as they're not derived from non-vegetarian sources. So the vegetarian diet can be supplemented in various ways, and it's not just, as you know, it's not just rice and vegetables. There's all kinds of beans that provide very good source of protein. There's tofu, so many things that I'll go into in the next presentation on Sanmargam diet. So there's really no basis for thinking that you are lacking any essential nutrition, any essential vitamin or mineral by subsisting on vegetarian diet. And if you need something, you can always supplement it, you know, by means of tablets or artificial things. You know, B12. You don't have to go to meat to get B12. You can take B12 supplements. And what other objection? Well, there is this objection that closing the meat industry which is what vegetarianism requires, will result in unemployment and lead to the starvation of meat plant workers, right? This is the economic argument. And I already gave you the facts on the contribution to the economy of the meat industry, right? What was that again? 832 billion here in the United States, 6% of the GDP of the U.S. economy, and 6.2 million jobs and 200 billion in wages and benefits. So the objection is, we're going to create serious economic problems and disruption if we then shut down all the meat industry. Well, we're not saying, well, ideally they should all be shut down, but in terms of practice, we want people to become flexitarians, that is, start moving towards a vegetarian diet. Occasionally they may eat meat or chicken, which is still prohibited in Siddhas and Margam, but if we're talking about how to get people to switch, you have to accept that some people will go through stages, if they are convinced by Vallalar's strong case for vegetarian food. But the economic objection doesn't really work. It's always been used whenever new things have been proposed or whenever some radical changes had to be made. Okay, so when we had to introduce trains, all the carriages, horse-driven carriages and all that, our owners obviously made the same argument. You're throwing all these carriage drivers out of work, and they're going to be suffering and so forth, right? That argument was not bought because they can simply be moved to the new economy based on buses and cars and so forth. In the same way, all these people that are working in the meat industry will then be employed in the developing vegetarian food industry. And, it's a variety of it. We're not just talking about just rice and potatoes. So the shift has to be made. And in many cases, even defense industries have shifted to civilian uses. They've started manufacturing things that are non-defense related. Now we see that the airlines are using aircraft for freight, transportation of goods, with the serious reduction in air travel by passengers and so forth. So that's all it requires. It requires transition, and it can be planned, and it can be done so that there is no economic hardship at all. And in fact, we can produce more economic growth on the basis of the vegetarian food industry, because we know the harmful effects of the meat industry. To raise all these animals, think of all the food that has to be produced for these animals. Think of the cost on the impact on the environment. So the transition to a completely vegetarian food industry will certainly be much better for the economy if that transition is properly designed and implemented. Government has to play a very important role here. But what we can do is, of course, convince people about the merits of vegetarianism. And there's even a city in Gujarat now that's wholly vegetarian. And I hope other cities in India will follow suit. India has a very important role to play in the promotion of this vegetarian food philosophy, ethic, and practice. Vallalar has given the foundation that's needed, and he has also given us indications about what kind of diet would be good, what kind of vegetarian diet we should be looking at, and how it can be developed further along the lines he has pointed out. So in any case, that economic argument is not successful and also falls. Then they can come up with the objection that, you see vegetarians who have diseases and they succumb to them, right? So you can find cases of vegetarians who are diabetic or they have other problems, health issues. So vegetarianism does not help to maintain health and does not automatically guarantee us from succumbing to disease. So what's the value or point of vegetarianism? Well, you see, nobody is saying, and Vallalar doesn't say vegetarianism will cure all diseases. It's one of the elements or essential elements or factors for health. Now, if I'm a vegetarian and I'm engaging in heavy drinking and smoking, right, I can't blame vegetarianism when I have lung cancer or liver disease. Obviously, I wasn't following other things that are also important for health. So, the case for vegetarianism is not the case for the silly view that vegetarianism itself will make you healthy, happy, and strong. No, the case is for the view that vegetarianism is essential, but it's not the only thing. You still have to avoid alcohol, smoking, harmful drugs, unhealthy lifestyle, and so forth. Do exercise and all that. All that goes without saying. So, when they point to diseases, they are forgetting that these diseases in vegetarians are due to other factors. They have not shown that it is vegetarianism which is causing that problem. Unless, of course, it's vegans who don't get enough calcium intake, right? Because they are avoiding milk and dairy products. In that case, you can say that's producing the problem. That's why it's Vallalar's vegetarianism. Vallalar was not a vegan. He emphasized, as I said, milk and dairy products, that is, products that come from milk. So, we're not dealing with that kind of situation here. Therefore, the vegetarianism of Vallalar addresses all the essential factors of nutrition and also emphasizes other factors, right? Vallalar has mentioned 4 factors. Agaram, which is food, has to be vegetarian food, nutritious vegetarian food, but he also mentioned nithirai or sleep. You have to regulate sleep. Now, we shouldn't misunderstand that to mean just sleep for 2 or 3 hours and so forth. There's all kinds of crazy things that are there in the Upadesa Kurupigal. You'll get into very serious trouble if you think Vallalar said all that. We now know that you need at least 7 to 8 hours of sleep. Now, if you develop meditation practice, then you can replenish your mental energy and get more rest through your meditation practice. Then, of course, you can reduce sleep, because the kind of rest that you're getting from sleep, you're getting more of it through meditation. If that happens, then you can reduce your sleep. Otherwise, you have to sleep the normal hours, which is 7 to 8 hours. Okay? Then we have bhayam, anxiety, fear, stress. I can be a vegetarian and then I'm in a kind of nervous agitation all the time. That's not going to help me to maintain optimal health. I have to pay attention also to the reduction of fear, anxiety, and stress. Short temper, outbursts of anger and all that. And then he mentioned maidhanam, or regulation of sexual activity and energy. So all these, apart from agaram, you have those other 3 factors to also regulate. So the non-vegetarian who says, oh, there's a vegetarian, he's suffering from this disease, what's the value of your vegetarianism, is simply thinking illogically. He's assuming that the disease is due to the vegetarianism, which is unlikely to be the case, and he's overlooking the fact that the disease is the cause of other factors, which in the case of Vallalar's approach, we are required to address. I've already mentioned what they are. So, I can be a vegetarian. Vallalar mentions sugar control. That is, he says intake of sugar has to be regulated. Now, if I'm a vegetarian and I'm eating all these sweet things day in and day out, of course, I'm going to develop some kind of, especially we also have genetic predisposition to diabetes, then I'm going to get diabetes. And if I don't control the sugar intake, simply saying I'm a vegetarian is not going to help me to control diabetes. See, all these things go without saying, almost like common sense. The non-vegetarian, in raising these kinds of objections, it just sounds silly, illogical and silly, So we don't need to take that kind of objection seriously. Vegetarianism is an essential thing, and if you take into account the other factors that Vallalar has pointed out, sleep, regulation of sleep, reduction of stress, anxiety, fear, regulation of sexual activity and energy, and of course, basic laws of hygiene and suddham and cleanliness and so forth, then Vallalar's vegetarianism will certainly lead to health and longevity. Yeah, and I'll develop this case in the follow-up presentation on Suddha Sanmargam. So there are really no sensible or persuasive non-vegetarian objections to switching or remaining or sticking to a vegetarian diet. So the conclusion is, if you're a reasonable person and you have carefully examined Vallalar's moral case and spiritual case for vegetarianism, and on top of it you take into account the moral and spiritual case against non-vegetarianism, that it's imsai agaram, food that comes as a result of inflicting cruelty, and tamasa agaram, or tamasic food, or food that's permeated by darkness and ignorance, your conclusion will be, I should become a vegetarian. And again, on top of it, add all the scientific studies that have come about now on the benefits of vegetarian diet, and on the harmful effects of meat and so forth. And then in the context of zoonosis, that is the spread of bacteria and viruses from animals to humans, vegetarianism becomes absolutely rational, reasonable, and critical. If we want to prevent the spread of pandemics and so forth, other pandemics, SARS was deadly but not so contagious. COVID-19 is very contagious but not so deadly. But what about a pandemic that becomes contagious and deadly, right? What are we going to do then? And scientists have said we have to be prepared for these things. But they're not, and they've said also, it has to do with all this contact with animals. But because of the pressures of the meat industry, they're not emphasizing vegetarianism and the need to avoid slitting the throats of chickens and cows and, cutting their body parts and eating them. They're not emphasizing it because, again, the pressures of the meat industry and the fact that the meat industry, makes this kind of contribution to the economy. But as I said, that can be changed. Like we've done in other cases. Steam engine was replaced by electric engines and so forth. Transitions and changes can be made if we properly plan and design things so the meat economy, the meat industry, can be transformed into a vegetarian food economy with much, much more benefits, much, much more economic growth, and then all-round benefits. Because we are going to eliminate all the harmful effects on the environment. We're also going to drastically reduce the risk of transmission of bacteria and viruses from animal meat, including poultry, to human beings. And we are going to drastically reduce things like cholesterol and the hypertension, heart disease, and things like that are caused by the consumption of meat, not to mention cancer. So the overall case for vegetarianism, especially in light of what Vallalar has said, is very compelling. So you have to be pretty irrational, I would say, unreasonable, not to make a decision to move towards the vegetarian food or not to become a vegetarian after this encounter with the great teaching of Vallalar. What prevents most people is custom, they say. or habit. They cannot control the tongue. The tongue has been used to tamasa agaram, and the tripti that comes from asutta maya karanvalakam, the impure, material of the senses, and then those who refuse to abandon meat eating are just caught in habit, parakam and varakam, and then the anyanam. Because they're not able to see that it's a tamasa agaram, that's a imsa agaram. It comes neatly packaged, and it comes with all kinds of things dressed up on a plate. But basically, a cow's head was shattered with a big hammer, with blood coming out of its eyes and ears, and then its body was cruelly cut up, okay, when probably it was still breathing. That's where you get your beef and your steak and this, that, and the other. And if you just reflect on it for a minute, if anyone reflects on it for a minute, I don't see how they can continue with this kind of food, which, as Vallalar correctly puts it, it is tamasic food, food characterized by darkness and ignorance, and imsayagaram, food that's come by creating suffering for a living being. So, again, I can only express my great respect and admiration for Vallalar for having so clearly expressed, so logically and clearly expressed the moral and spiritual basis of his advocacy of vegetarianism or sattva, whatever. I hope we can all take his teachings to heart, and if not convert to vegetarianism right away, at least begin to seriously move towards it. I've been a vegetarian all my life, but for those who cling to custom and meat eating and all kinds of crazy beliefs like the ones that Vivekananda was propagating, if you eat vegetarian food, you'll become weak, and meat eating is a strength of a sign of manliness and all that kind of nonsense. It's cruelty. Okay? Imsai, there's nothing manly about imsai. There is nothing manly about taking a living being and subjecting it to vadaito, suffering, torment, torture. Okay? So a real man, or a real person, human being, will not engage in those things. So vegetarianism is the food of real men, real people. Okay? So on that note, let me end this presentation, and thank you all for your patience. And as I said, I have a second part which I can present sometime in January on Suddha Sanmarga diet. And I go into different things based on what Vallalar has said, and nutrition studies and so forth. But anyway, thank you all. Once again, happy to share my thoughts with you all.